I gave my sister $700 a week only to have her call me a loser when I got fired from my job, so I cut her off, and now my parents have stepped in. I smiled and said this. I've always been the one to help out when my family needed something. Growing up, I was the one who stepped up to handle problems when my parents couldn't or wouldn't. But this turned into something I never saw coming, and if I could go back, I'd stop myself before I got dragged into their mess. A few years ago, my parents came to me with what they called a small favor. My younger sister, Amanda, was just starting college, and they were worried about how she'd fit in. Apparently, her friends came from wealthy families, the kind of girls who showed up with expensive bags, perfect outfits, and plans to go to Cancun for spring break. My parents were worried that Amanda would feel left out, and worse, that people would think she was poor. Can you help her out with some money every week? My dad asked. Just until she gets back on her feet. We don't want her to be embarrassed in front of her friends. I remember sitting there stunned. Amanda was 19 and perfectly capable of getting a part-time job. My parents weren't struggling financially either. Sure, they weren't rich, but they weren't hurting. If anything, they were living it up. They just leased a brand new SUV, they went out for steak dinners every other weekend, and they'd recently returned from a cruise to the Bahamas. Meanwhile, I was working a decent but demanding job and trying to save a little here and there. Still, I felt guilty. Amanda and I weren't particularly close, but I didn't want her to feel like she didn't belong. Plus, my parents made it sound like I was saving her from a lifetime of insecurity. So, like an idiot, I agreed. At first, I thought I'd just be helping her with the little things: textbooks, gas money, maybe the occasional dinner out. But no. The number they threw out? $700 a week. $700. She needs enough to keep up with her friends. My mother said, like it was perfectly reasonable. It wasn't easy. I had to get a second job just to cover my own rent, groceries, and bills while sending her that much money every week. My parents barely pitched in. Every time I asked, they had some excuse about needing their savings for emergencies. But they always seemed to have money for vacations and expensive nights out. Months went by and it was always the same story. Amanda would text me and casually ask if I'd sent the money yet, as if it were a routine bill. My parents would check in from time to time to remind me how important it was to help her, as if I'd forgotten. I told myself it was temporary, just until Amanda got on her feet and started earning her own money. But temporary turned into 6 months. Then a year. Then 2. By the end of the first year, it was clear that this wasn't temporary. Amanda wasn't looking for a job, and my parents certainly weren't pushing her to get one. If anything, they seemed perfectly happy with the arrangement. Every time I brought it up, I'd get the same excuses. She's focused on school. My mother would say, she's young, she'll figure it out. My father would add. Meanwhile, I was working 60-hour weeks between 2 jobs, barely sleeping, and living off instant noodles most nights. I kept telling myself it was for Amanda's future, that she'd eventually appreciate what I was doing for her. But that illusion was shattered when she came home for winter break. I just finished a 12-hour shift and stopped by my parents' house to drop off some Christmas presents. Amanda was there with her friends, sitting in the living room surrounded by shopping bags from high-end stores. She was laughing and showing off a new bracelet that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Thanks for this, by the way, she said, waving the bracelet in the air like it was no big deal. I was confused. What do you mean? Oh, I used some of the money you sent. I just had to have it, it's so me, right? I didn't even know what to say. I thought the money was for rent or food or something practical. But no, she blew it on jewelry and designer clothes. And my parents? They didn't seem to care. My mom even said, she has such good taste, doesn't she? That was the first time I thought about cutting her off. But I didn't. I should have, but I didn't. A few months later it got worse. I started falling behind at my first job because I was exhausted from juggling both jobs. My boss warned me to get in shape, but I was already stretched so thin I didn't know how to fix it. Then one night, Amanda called me out of the blue. She said, "Hey, I need an extra $300 this week. My friends are planning a trip to Miami, and I can't be the only one not going." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Amanda, I already send you $700 a week. You can't expect me to give you more." Her response? "Well, if you were better with your money, that wouldn't be a problem." That stung. I wanted to yell at her, but I stopped myself. Instead, I told her I couldn't help her and hung up. The next day, my mother called. "Why are you being so difficult?" she said, as if I was the one in the wrong. "You know how important this trip is to Amanda's social life. Can't you just make it work?" That's when I realized my parents weren't just enabling her, they were using me. They didn't want to look like the bad guys, so they put all the responsibility on me. Things spiraled from there. A month later, I lost my first job because I couldn't keep up with the workload. I was devastated, but when I told my parents, they didn't offer any support. "Well, you'd better find something fast," my father said. "Amanda needs a smart, hard-working brother to look up to." And Amanda? She didn't even pretend to care. "You're not going to stop sending money, are you?" "I kind of depend on it," she said, like I was an ATM that had suddenly stopped working. That's when it hit me. They didn't see me as a person anymore. I was just a paycheck to them. Losing my first job was bad enough, but what happened next pushed me over the edge. My second job didn't pay nearly enough to cover everything, and for the first time in years, I had to choose between paying my rent and sending money to Amanda. I ended up dipping into my savings what little I had left to keep her happy. I called her one night to explain the situation. I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd understand. "Amanda, things are tight right now," I said. "I lost one of my jobs, and I can't keep sending you all this money. You're going to have to start cutting back." Her reaction floored me. "What? Are you serious? You're supposed to have my back. Do you know how embarrassing it would be if I couldn't keep up with my friends? What would I tell them? I don't know, maybe the truth?" I snapped. "Are you kidding me? That's so selfish. You're ruining my life over what you rent. Figure it out, you always do." That was the last straw. I hung up and sat there in silence, trying to process what had just happened. All these years of breaking my back to help her, and she couldn't even pretend to care about what I was going through. But what happened next was even worse. The very next day, my mother called me. I thought maybe Amanda had told her what had happened and she was checking up on me. "Nope. Your sister called me in tears," she said, her tone dripping with guilt. "You can't just stop helping her. She's counting on you." "Mom, I lost my job," I said, trying to keep my composure. "I'm barely making ends meet. I can't afford to send her that kind of money anymore." "Well, maybe you wouldn't have lost your job if you hadn't spent so much time feeling sorry for yourself," she shot back. I couldn't believe it. I wasn't even a person to her anymore, just a source of income. A week later, I got an eviction notice. I'd fallen behind on my rent because I was still sending money to Amanda, hoping to keep the peace. My landlord wasn't interested in excuses, and I didn't blame him. I packed up and moved into a dingy studio apartment that I could barely afford. I tried to keep it quiet, but Amanda somehow found out. Instead of being supportive, she called me and said, "You're living in a dump now? Great. Do you have any idea how embarrassing it would be for people to know that my brother can't even keep a decent apartment?" I didn't even answer. I just hung up and stared at the wall. The final blow came a month later. I lost my second job. By then, I was already in a depression. I couldn't sleep, I wasn't eating right, and I barely had the energy to leave my apartment. I thought maybe this would wake up my family, that they'd finally realize how much pressure I was under. Instead, my dad called me and said, "Amanda needs to have a smart, hard-working brother to look up to. Get your act together or stay out of her life." It was like they didn't even care that I was falling apart. I turned to my older brother Brian as a last resort. We weren't particularly close, but he had always been the level-headed one in the family. I told him everything, how I'd been giving Amanda $700 a week, how I'd lost both my jobs, and how our parents treated me like garbage. To my surprise, Brian wasn't just sympathetic, he got angry. "This is crazy," he said. "They're treating you like a cash cow while they live it up? And Amanda acts like a spoiled brat? I'll take care of it." I didn't know what he meant at the time, but I would soon find out that Brian wasn't messing around. When Brian said he'd take care of it, I didn't think much of it. He's always been calm and collected, the kind of guy who doesn't make waves unless he has to. So I figured he'd give them a stern talking to, maybe make them feel guilty about me. But Brian had something else in mind. A few days later I got a text from Amanda. "WTF? Brian just told Mom and Dad they have 30 days to move out of his apartment. What did you tell him?" I stared down at my phone in shock. I had no idea our parents were living in Brian's rental. He owned a small 2-bedroom condo downtown, but I'd assumed it was vacant or rented to someone else. Turns out he'd let them stay there rent-free after they sold our childhood home a few years ago, claiming they wanted to downsize. I called Brian right away. "What's going on?" "Amanda just said you're kicking them out." "They'd been freeloading for years," Brian said calmly. "They've been financing Amanda and I've been carrying them. Enough is enough. I'm putting the place on the market." "You're selling it?" I asked, stunned. "Yes. You've had it too good for too long. You can go back to your old house." I wanted to ask how, since the house was sold, but Brian cut me off. "They didn't really sell it," he said. "They rented it. They've been collecting rent all along." That hit me like a punch in the gut. All these years they made it sound like they were struggling, like they didn't have the money to support Amanda. And all this time they'd been sitting on the rent, letting me and Brian foot the bill for her life. True to his word, Brian gave them 30 days to move out. My parents were furious, calling me constantly to complain about how I turned Brian against them. They even tried to get Amanda involved, hoping she'd guilt me into changing his mind. But Brian wouldn't budge. At first I thought Amanda would side with our parents. But then she called me, sobbing. "What am I going to do?" she cried. "Mom and Dad said they can't afford to help me anymore because they have to pay for the house. I can't even buy a decent purse." I don't know what came over me, but I burst out laughing. After everything I'd been through, the fact that her biggest concern was a handbag was just too much. She hung up, but I didn't care. I thought that was the end of it, that they'd move back into their old house and finally start taking responsibility for themselves. But then something happened that I didn't see coming. For a while, it seemed like things were finally settling down. My parents and Amanda reluctantly moved back into their old house, which, as Brian predicted, they had been renting out for years. I thought maybe this would force them to reevaluate their priorities. Maybe Amanda would finally get a job. Maybe my parents would stop living like retired billionaires. But no. They didn't change. If anything, they doubled down on blaming me for their problems. A week after they moved back, my mother called me out of the blue. "You ruined everything," she said flatly. "Your sister is devastated, and we've had to cut back on so many things because of you and Brian." I couldn't believe it. "You're the ones who put me in this position," I snapped. "Do you know how much I've sacrificed for Amanda? For you? And you had rental income all the time. We used that money for necessities," she shot back. "Oh, really? Like the cruise? The SUV? The dinners out?" She didn't have much to say after that, but it was clear they weren't going to take any responsibility. Then Amanda took it to a whole new level. One night, she posted a long rant on social media about how she was being abandoned by her family. She didn't mention any names, but it was obvious that she was talking about me and Brian. She claimed she was being made to suffer because of selfish decisions, and how hard it was to live in a small, boring house after being used to her lifestyle. Her friends chimed in with comments like, "You deserve better, girl," and "Your family should support you no matter what." I couldn't believe what I was reading. After all I'd done for her, she was playing the victim? Brian saw it too and sent me a screenshot. "Do you see this nonsense?" he wrote. "Unbelievable," I replied. But Amanda wasn't done. A few days later, she showed up at my apartment unannounced. I hadn't seen her in weeks, and I was honestly surprised she had the nerve to come over after everything. She walked in like she owned the place, and immediately started laying into me. "You're pathetic," she said. "You can't even keep a job, and now I'm the one who has to suffer because of your incompetence. Do you know how humiliating this is for me?" That was it. I snapped. "You're the one who should be humiliated, Amanda," I said. "You've been living off me for years, blowing money on designer crap while I worked myself into the ground. And now that I'm finally done letting you and Mom and Dad use me, you have the audacity to show up here and insult me?" She stared at me stunned. "I needed the money," she said weakly. "No, you didn't. You wanted it. There's a difference." She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I thought that was the last I'd hear of her, but then, just as I was beginning to breathe again, something completely unexpected happened. 2 days after Amanda stormed out of my apartment, I received a text message from Brian. "You're not going to believe this," he said, attaching a photo. It was a screenshot of a GoFundMe page. The title read, "Help me get back on my feet after family abandonment." I clicked on the link, and sure enough, Amanda had created it. The description was a sob story about how her support system had cruelly cut her off and left her to fend for herself. She portrayed herself as a victim of neglect, claiming she couldn't even afford basic necessities, let alone maintain the stability she was used to. The kicker? The goal was $50,000. I stared at the page, equal parts angry and amazed. She already had over $1,000 in donations, with comments from strangers like, "Stay strong," and "Family shouldn't treat you like this." Some of her friends had even shared the page, calling her brave for speaking out. Brian called me, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "So I guess we're officially the bad guys now? I can't believe she's doing this," I said. "She knows it's all lies." "Of course she does," he said. "But she also knows that people eat this stuff up. She's playing the game." At first I didn't want to get involved. I figured the site would fizzle out and people would forget about it once they realized it was all fake. But then my mother called me, furious. "How dare you let Amanda get to this point?" she yelled. "She wouldn't have to ask strangers for help if you and Brian weren't so selfish." "Are you serious?" I shot back. "She's scamming people and you're defending her?" "She's doing what she has to do," my mother said. "You should be ashamed." That's when I realized that my parents had completely bought into Amanda's story. Or maybe they just didn't care about the truth anymore. Either way, they were completely on her side. I wasn't the only one to notice. Brian, who usually stays calm in these situations, decided to take matters into his own hands. He left a comment on Amanda's GoFundMe page. "Before you donate, ask Amanda where the thousands of dollars I gave her over the years went. Or the $700 a week our brother sent her. Ask her about the vacations, designer bags, and nights out she blew it on while we worked to support her. This site is a scam, and she knows it." It didn't take long for the backlash to begin. People began questioning Amanda in the comments, asking for details about where the money was going. Some even demanded refunds. Amanda retaliated by deleting Brian's comment and blocking him from the site, but the damage was done. Word spread, and her donations dried up almost overnight. That's when things took a darker turn. My parents called again, this time demanding that I apologize to Amanda. "She's heartbroken," my father said. "You and Brian humiliated her in front of everyone. Fix this." "I'm not going to apologize for telling the truth," I said. "And neither should Brian." "That's it," my mother snapped. "If you don't make this right, you're not a son of ours." I was stunned. "After all I've done for you, this is how it ends?" "It's your fault," she said. "All of it." I hung up without another word, my hands shaking. I couldn't believe that my own family had completely turned against me. But as much as it hurt, I knew I couldn't go back now. That night, as I sat in my tiny apartment, I received an unexpected text from Amanda. It was short, but it hit me like a punch in the gut. "You're going to regret this," she wrote. I didn't know what she meant, but I had a bad feeling I was about to find out. After Amanda's text, I braced myself for whatever drama was to come, but nothing could have prepared me for how quickly it all fell apart. Brian stood his ground, refusing to let our parents back into his apartment, or give Amanda a single cent. Meanwhile, the GoFundMe fiasco left Amanda's reputation in tatters among her friends. She ended up deleting all of her social media accounts after people started calling her out for lying. My parents, true to form, refused to take responsibility for anything. They moved back into their old house, but their finances were in shambles. They couldn't afford their previous lifestyle, and my mother had to take a part-time retail job. My father spent most of his days sulking and blaming me and Brian for everything that went wrong. And Amanda? She finally got a job just barely. She's working part-time at a boutique, complaining all the time about how unfair her life is now. Apparently, the humiliation of having to work instead of shop was too much for her. As for me, I made the hardest decision of my life. I cut everyone off completely. No more calls, no more visits, no more being dragged into their mess. Brian and I still talk, and he's been a rock through it all, but the rest of them? I'm done. It wasn't easy at first. I kept waiting for the guilt to kick in, for the urge to check on them to take over. But as the weeks turned into months, I realized how much lighter I felt without their constant demands hanging over my head. I began to focus on myself for the first time in years. I got a new job, not the highest paying gig, but one that didn't leave me exhausted and miserable. I even took up a few hobbies that I'd always wanted to try but never had the time for. Looking back, I don't regret giving them up. It's sad, sure, but sometimes you have to walk away to save yourself. They can blame me all they want, but I'm finally at peace. And honestly, that's worth more than anything I ever gave them.